Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sammy, and I will be the WebEx producer for today's event. We have keeping items before we get started. If you experience technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please dial 1-866-779-3239, or you can message me using the Q&A panel. Please note, as an attendee, you are part of a larger audience. However, due to privacy rights, we have chosen not to display the number of attendees to everyone on the call. In the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. A reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We encourage written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel located at the bottom right of your screen. After typing the space at the bottom, hit the send button, and please be sure to direct your questions to all panelists in the Ask menu. Your questions will not be seen by other members of the audience and will be addressed time permitting towards the end of the session. Now I am pleased to turn the call to your first speaker today, Stephen Engel. Stephen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Sam. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. John Barquet, Senior Scientist for Ecolab. John Barquet is an expert on pest elimination techniques for food and beverage processing, service, hospitality, and related industries. Since Ecolab in 1990, Dr. Barquet has specialized in developing thorough and effective integrated pest management programs with minimal use of pesticides. As a scientist and program leader, Dr. Barquet helped to develop the Ecolab Pest Elimination Division's pesticide evaluation and development projects. He has published many articles on integrated pest management of cockroaches and other pests, and is the holder of several industry-related patents. And welcome, Dr. Barquet.
Thank you, Stephen, very much, and welcome everybody to a lunchtime webinar, at least for us in the central part of the U.S. And as always, we like to have very appetizing subjects. So today we're going to talk about rodent readiness, and basically for food handling facilities. Could be food and beverage processing plants all the way to food service. So we'll get through this together. And we've got a full agenda for the next 45 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions and answers. And we'll cover the basics of biology and behavior, and we'll translate to the understanding of the practical steps that you can take to protect your business and can expect from a reputable pest service provider. So what are the responsibilities of both parties? And finally, we'll introduce some helpful educational materials you can use to reinforce this with your staff. So here is basically a video of what was captured in a grocery store, and really rodents are a what we're considering a flashpoint pest today, and this means that just one sighting can significantly affect your brand. And with social media and such, some of us have experienced that, and it's not fun when that happens. So because rodents can have such a significant impact on your brand, it's important than ever that we deliver consistent elimination and work together to do that. So pests such as rodents are very critical to keep at bay within your facility. So let's talk a little bit about identification. We don't need to get into too much detail here, but well, obviously we're talking about mice and rats. And just to keep it simple, rats big, mice small, okay? And then we're going to get into some behavior differences which are quite significant between the two, and we'll get a better understanding of what it is that they do in and around your facility. Okay. In the U.S. And abroad, we're dealing primarily with house mice, Norway rats, and roof rats. But we've got some particular species that may be local to certain countries, such as North America. We also have deer mice, and all of these are associated with coming indoors, especially in the cooler weather. And they're very active both inside and outside in some locations. And a very food safety standpoint and public health standpoint, they are known to carry a variety of diseases, including those that transport foodborne pathogens. So first one is the house mouse, followed by the Norway and the roof rat. So these are the ones that we'll be really focusing on today. So in terms of safety impact, and in addition to that, they can cause property damage through their gnawing and such and their burrowing activity. They do contaminate food with their feces, urine, and fur. Of course, that translates into economic loss, fines, recalls, and of course it can affect your reputation. And they also are known to carry a variety of fleas and other parasites in addition to these disease-causing organisms. In terms of mice, they begin reproduction from 6 to 8 weeks, so they're very rapid in their capability of reproduction. Gestation period is approximately 3 weeks, and litter size is 4 to 7. So from a single pair, you could have 40 to 60 mice being produced per year. So very prolific breeders, and given enough food and water and shelter, they can grow their populations very quickly. Action in rats begins at 12 weeks. Gestation period is approximately 3 weeks, as it is with mice. Litter size is 8 to 12, and as with the mice, they can breed very quickly. From a single pair, you could get 50 to 60 rats per year. Generally, they've got poor vision during the day, but they're at dusk and at twilight hours. Their vision is actually surprisingly good because they're keen to that time of day. They're colorblind, but they're very capable of moving around in the dark. They've got an excellent sense of hearing. Their sense of taste is highly developed, and smell is very important to them. So they've got a keen sense of smell, and they rely very heavily on the sense of touch. Oftentimes, they're moving around in total darkness. So their vibrissae, or their whiskers, are very important in them being able to move around in the environments. They actually memorize their environments over time through what's called kinesthetics, which is learned muscle movement. So they can move very quickly in an environment that they're and securely in an environment that they're familiar with. In terms of exploration, we'll get into this in more detail because it's important to understand what the differences of behavior when a rodent is newly introduced into a facility versus one that's been there for a while and has established an infestation. But it's important to understand they can get through very small openings. Adult mouse can get through an opening the size of a quarter inch, about the size of a dime, and the main factor is the size of their skull. So providing they can get their head through, they can get the rest of their body through. For rats, it's about a half an inch, so it's surprisingly small for them too. And from a behavior standpoint, rats are very neophobic. They don't like new things, so putting out traps and other devices can be more challenging for rats because they don't get to them very quickly. Mice are much more inquisitive. They're still somewhat intelligent, if you will, but they're very curious, and they're not so wary of new objects in their environment. Now here, the capability of this mouse being able to squeeze under the crack. So you can see it's out from here, and then you can see it squeeze its body. So just a very small opening is all they need to get through. Now, signs of rodent activity, the things that we inspect for, are, of course, are droppings, and you can usually tell the difference between mice and rat droppings. It's pretty obvious. Just note about droppings, just the presence of them themselves does not indicate an active population. It could be very old from a long time ago. And there's really no good way to age or tell how old droppings are. I just want to put that out right away. Pictured on the right top picture, just here you hear some rub marks. And rub marks are what happens when rodents walk through tight areas and they have oils or secretions on their bodies that get deposited over time. Down here are swing marks on the rafters. Those are caused by rats actually swinging on the rafters to move around. And then we get into milling facilities. We can actually see the footprints and flour and such like that. So trails and tracks are other things that we look for. And of course, in addition to the rodents themselves. Damage, product damage. So we know that they're in there and what they're feeding on, and active infestation. In this case, we probably do. And nesting sites. So nests can be composed of a variety of materials. And again, it's difficult to tell how old the nests are and such. So it's important to keep these areas cleaned up so new activity can be recognized quickly. And the droppings shown here are mouse droppings, and again, these should be cleaned up on a regular basis, and so that we can detect new rodent activity more quickly, and get on it right away. So again, dropping some cells are an indication of an active infestation. Another example of rub marks here. Again, just because they're rub marks does not mean there's an active infestation, but it does indicate a highway or a very frequently traveled location we might be able to take advantage of with certain trapping techniques. You can also see under fluorescent light urine stains. This is not a very reliable inspection method. I just want to say that because there's a lot of materials that fluoresce. Mouse urine, rodent urine will fluoresce under black light, and it can be used as another method of inspection. So what is the rodents? Well, obviously, we're living in their environment. They're very happy in their environment, but they find ours to be quite inviting because of the warmth and the food and such. And so nearby fields, vegetation, food cleaning facilities in rural areas are going to have specific pressure to mice and rats. Nearby rail cars, of course, in shipments, they can be brought in, and very attracted to the food and the water sources. So one of the first things we do from an outside-in approach is look for those gaps or holes in the structures where the rodents are getting in, and we'll talk about that in more detail. So let's talk in approach. That's the general philosophy we have to use when going after rodents, as well as a variety of other pests such as flying insects. The outside-in approach is a good way to do it. And basically, with rodents, we've got 3 zones of activity that we need to be worried about. The exterior, of course, this is going to be the immediate perimeter of the facility, as well as the surrounding grounds, what's going on out there in terms of rodent burrow activity, conducive conditions that are drawing them to the area, and got introduction points, and these tend to be doorways. So we're going to, they're capable of getting through crevices, as we've mentioned. And as you can see here, there's a really good opportunity for a rodent to get into this facility because there's a door sweep is lacking that door. And the interior. Now, once rodents become established on the inside, that's when we consider there to be an infestation. In other words, they're nesting and reproducing within the facility. Just want to point out, when they are coming in these introduction points, it's important to have methods to intercept them. So these are the types of things we'll be talking about. These zones, we're talking about introduction points, and we talked about the exterior of the facility. This is the exterior zone. The interior zone, the introduction points. And by and large, what we're talking about here are doors. So doors get into the facility is probably the most common way that rodents get into most facilities. And here, what we're picturing here in a diagram is basically use of intercepting traps. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we'll show a video here, and I'll share my screen. Is that the one? Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to share my desktop here with you and show at first what happens when a rodent first comes into a facility. And this is behavior. What you see here, and of course this is a repeat, it's just going over. When a rodent first comes into a facility, they are scared and they're just looking for a place to hide. So putting traps such as this is a little peat that one is running into, is very, very important. So this is that we want to talk about when we talk about that introduction behavior. So when a rodent first gets into a facility, it's scared, it doesn't know where to go, so it will run along the wallways, as you saw, and a good place for those traps to intercept them. So talk about those same zones, and now let's talk about the interior zone. And this time we have what's called foraging behavior. So I'll show you a different video. It's going to be a rodent that is established with ability. And you can see is, first of all, it's gained a little bit of weight, so it's obviously eating well. Now this is the difference. When it comes up to one of the interceptor traps, Notice the different behavior. This rodent is not scared. It knows where its food supplies are. It's perfectly comfortable in this environment. This is total darkness. This was filled in infrared. And you can see probably a pregnant female here. We've got an active infestation with rodents that are familiar with the environments, and we need to address this differently. This is where we actually have an infestation that we need to be concerned about. Okay, the differences in the two types of behavior, and we've got an outside-in approach that we need to use then for the rodents, and it's based on what's going on with their biology and behavior. So exterior, this is the grounds around the structure, the outside perimeter, and we need to have systems in place for proactive interception of rodents right around the perimeter. Outside monitoring and or suppression equipment is to be installed by your pest service provider. And then introduction points. So we have both things around the perimeter of the property to help us suppress the rodent population, and then as we talked about on the immediate interior, we need traps to intercept them as they come through those introduction points. Here, once we have established populations of rodents, they have, of course, infestation, and there needs to be some sort of escalation in service. And this is going to be places where we're actually looking for places to trapping regime and remove the rodents as quickly as we can. Responsibilities for you and your staff at your facilities, and this should be communicated and as part of the training from your pest management provider to make sure everybody is working in concert to keep your facility pest-free. And it's essential, so we talked about the exterior, the introduction points, and the interior of the facility. And store garbage. I think this is a no-brainer. Oftentimes we see dumpsters and such overflowing. The lids are open, it's leaking, the trash is not well contained and may not be changed frequently enough. So standing water and reduce clutter and excess vegetation, which are all very attractive to rodents. Doors, it's important to put industrial door sweeps on the bottom of each door to keep the rodents from getting in. Typically these are brush type door sweeps that the rodents do not like to chew through. Don't use rubber. Rubber will be immediately chewed through. Rodents can chew through anything with the exception of metal and concrete, and these brush type places are not attractive to the rodents as well. So use industrial door sweeps on every door to keep the rodents from getting in. There's also the possibility of pipe chases and other areas that they may be getting in. And we start talking about roof rats. They're more of a three-dimensional pest that we need to be concerned with, and they can get in areas above the building, including the roof. And remove unnecessary clutter on the interior of the facility. Allow access for inspection and monitoring. We have to have places, and from a pest service provider standpoint, where we can install interception traps. And so we need to keep a good barrier around the interior walls and such so that we can do that. And clean up unsanitary conditions. Keep the rodent droppings cleaned up, especially after pest service has been provided, so we can keep track of if there are any additional rodent activity that we need to be concerned with. Sanitation, locate and eliminate exterior breeding and harborage. And this is not just for rodents, it can be for a variety of pests. Pallets are very attractive to rodents as well as birds and other exterior pests. So those should be well managed. And keeping standing water and such as best you can, knowing that we have to be practical and you can't always remove all standing water, but rats require an active source of water, much more than mice do. But still, that's very important for both rats and mice. And we mentioned make sure that you're eliminating all gaps around doors and following your pest management provider's advice when it comes to structure and sanitation. This shown here is actually a door that has been gnawed through by rodents to get inside. Again, there's opportunities for repair and putting on those door sweeps. What your pest service provider should do, components of a successful pest program should be science-based, and it should be basically a service approach and a partnership with you so that everybody's on board from the standpoint of service as well as documentation and keeping the rodents away from the facility. So there's that your pest management provider should be with at all times. And we want to, of course, try to keep them from getting into the facility. And there's a variety of stations that are out there. This is the Ecolab checkpoint station, as it's called. It has the capability of both trapping rodents on the exterior as well as using baits for either monitoring purposes or actually rodenticide and reducing the population around the exterior. So depending on what your facility wants or needs will be determined by your pest management provider. Certain facilities don't want toxic bait used around the outside of their perimeter, so there's options in terms of using non-toxic material for monitoring purposes, repeating that when rodent activity is detected. Shown here is a block bait, and these typically weather very well on the exterior. There's a variety of such baits available, and the pest management provider will use the bait that is being most accepted that rodent population. And there are trapping techniques that can be used for both mice and rats. There are multiple trap systems that can be used. As shown here, we can catch more than one mouse in a trap. Rats are much more intelligent and wary, so we really have good multiple catch systems at this time to catch rats. Once you catch one, the other rats will be wary. But shown here are a couple of rat snap traps that can be installed in the station as well. And here of the property, there's multiple trap catch systems for intercepting rodents, and there's a variety of types of snap traps, and there's a real science behind being able to eliminate an interior infestation. We call it, when they get in there, mass trapping, especially when it comes to existing populations that have been in there for some time, and doing it in such a fashion that we can remove the rodents as quickly as possible. Typically, rodents that are more quickly are the very young and dumb, and then what's left, especially rat populations, are the more intelligent alpha males. And the alphas that generally are very intelligent. They've learned how to avoid equipment. We've done a lot of video of interaction with equipment and rodents and know that just traps out overnight for an existing population is not likely to be sufficient. It takes several days to completely remove a population, and especially with rats that have become established and are wary of new objects. So it should be understood that when your pest management provider is doing the escalation procedure, this would take several days to completely remove all of the rodents. So we'll put that out there because the expectation of some of us might be, well, why can't we just put them out and then take them out, take the traps out the next day? That may not be sufficient depending on the situation and the species that we're dealing with. So just a note on roof rats. Roof rats are becoming more troublesome across the U.S. And they are one of the more challenging rodents to eliminate because they are a three-dimensional animal. They're not just going to be on the lower floors. They get up into the roofs, into the rafters, and it's much more difficult to eliminate than the Norway rat or the house mouse. Prevention, obviously inspection, and they're going to need to do a thorough inspection on the exterior, interior, see how the rodents are getting in and what are the opportunities for exclusion. So they'll be looking very closely at the sanitation and the structure and what products and systems are going to be most effective for the particular situation. So again, we talked about different baits. There's monitoring tools that we can use that are basically non-toxic baits. And then there are trapping systems that we talked about. And very important, again, get door sweeps on all of your exterior doors. So place baits around the exterior facility, very important. Of course, we all like our landscaping, and in some situations of food service, it's very nice to have attractive landscaping. But in this case, this is a very conducive foliar and perfect for hiding of rodents. There can also be mulch that has gotten very deep, and deep mulch, especially in moist, wet areas, is conducive to a variety of pests, and not just rodents, but cockroaches and other pests that like to get into those mulch situations. So Our recommendation is if you can, keep a 2-foot foliage-free barrier around the perimeter of the facility, and that makes it better in terms of reducing that pest harborage right up against the facility, and also making access to traps and bait stations and such much more accessible. And then your doorways, this is a repeater, and a repeater is basically the mouse goes into this entranceway, they can get in and they can't get out. So this is a trap designed for mice, and we can catch multiple traps. These should be secured and documented and regularly inspected, and any activity noted is documented. Again, I just want to enforce that just because we're catching rodents in these perimeter traps that are placed by doors is not an indication of an interior infestation. Rather, the pest management service is doing its job. It is accepting the rodents where they need to be before they can get into the interior. So until we have an established population inside that is actually nesting as well as reproducing within the facility, we don't consider that to be an active infestation, and we don't need to escalate to using more traps inside. At least that's usually the case. So we do have white papers that describes everything that I've talked about and more here, and we've also got rodent readiness instruction video. This video will also, the session will also be available. Again, you can review this or review it with your teams as it is being recorded. So with that, I got through the material fairly quickly, but I want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. So if we have questions coming through, I'm happy to take those right now.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Very interesting. Always to see this again. There were some questions that have come through so far, and we'll be monitoring for some additional ones. First, going back to the fluorescence of rodent urine, is there a specific wavelength that your urine fluoresces?
Yeah, in terms of ultraviolet light, as long as it's, and the darker the spectrum of the ultraviolet light, the more it will fluoresce. What's really important is the output of the flashlight, because there's a variety of ones available, and so you need a good, in terms of wavelength is important, but actually the output of the bulb to be able to detect it and see it more easily, because it's not very easy to detect the rodent urine. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of other materials that will fluoresce. So it's not a very good or reliable method for inspect for rodents. It's an additional tool, but we really haven't found it in the pest control industry to be all that useful compared to the other inspection techniques that we have.
All right. You mentioned something about industrial door sweeps, and do you know what specific materials they are made of if you're going to be looking to purchase these?
Yeah, they're typically, it's going to be a brush style, so I'm not familiar with the type of material that the brush is made of. Your pest management provider will be able to provide you with that information, and there's a variety of sources that you can go online to look for industrial door sweeps. Of course, they need to be sized to the door and then installed properly such that the brush is meeting the floor and there are no gaps produced. So it's best to get that installed by someone that knows it, be either a professional contractor or your pest management provider.
The diseases listed of those transmitted by rodents is diphtheria. How can this happen?
In different parts of the world, we really don't see this in North America, but in certain parts of the world where diphtheria, cholera, it's physical transmission. So they'll get these particular organisms on their bodies, and in some cases, I'm not sure about diphtheria, but they can be passed through the feces and the urine. But they're considered mechanical carriers of disease. So any potential bacteria or virus that has any length of time of survival inside can be physically transmitted by rodents.
Okay. Here, does peppermint oil work as a repellent?
Yeah, that's a good question. A number of years ago, there were some plastic bags marketed that had essential oils in them, such as peppermint, and these are essential oils that are extracted from plants. that have some level of repellency to certain organisms. But what we have found in our evaluations is if a rodent really wants to get through that plastic bag, they will. Any of these essential oils is not potent enough to really be a good deterrent for rodents that are determined to get in. So at high concentrations, maybe initially, but very poor durability, and to you and I, they can also become objectionable at high concentrations. So, and answer to that question, I know I've given a long answer, but the short answer is they're just not very effective.
All right. Another thing about repellents of some sorts, how effective are rat guards on cruise ship mooring lines?
If they're done correctly, they can be helpful. There's different types of rat guards, and essentially what these do is these can also be used for utilities going into buildings, and some of them are composed of discs that spin, or that spins, or cones that prevent them from passing over the line. So mice and rats, particularly roof rats, are very good at crawling on these lines. So it's important. I can understand around the ship ports, they call them the rat and roof rats. They're known for being in these areas, in these dock areas, and they can get on board very easily if those lines are not protected.
Just a question, I think you talked about this in your presentation, but how do you determine if you are infested with rodents?
The usual thing, the signs that you have for an active infestation, again, not just catching them on the interior traps or next to the doorways. If they don't go beyond that, then we don't have an infestation. But if you have droppings, say we're in a grocery store and you notice too much on some of the materials that you have, the food items, or you have droppings under the gondola, those can be indications of an active infestation. Obviously, nests and the presence of young rats or mice are an indication of an active infestation inside. So really, they need to be nesting, they need to be familiar with the area and foraging inside the facility for us to really call it an infestation, where we can go in with escalation procedures, as they're often called, and get into a mass trapping regime, which is necessary when you have an indoor breeding population.
All right. How do rodents nest from their food source, and where are these nests most likely to be located in retail establishments?
In retail establishments, they'll tend to stay close to their food supply. So if food supplies within reach, then they'll stay very close to that, and they won't forage very far. Rat and mice, especially mice, are very territorial, and so they will fight for their certain territory. So if they've got abundant food supplies, they'll be there together. But if the sanitation and such is good, then they can forage for much farther to get to their food sources. In retail, we often see the gondola areas as very common nesting sites, because obviously that's where the food is. You got the dog food, the bird seed, and things like that. So they tend to be very commonly nesting under those areas. So that's a place that will be an area of focus. If those can be exposed and opened for easy inspection, and also access if we do need to do some trapping. They are very thigmotactic animals. They like to be up against edges. They don't generally like to be out in the light, and they're nocturnal invaders. So very cryptic behaviors where they like to hide. So really, if there's any shelter provided, it could be pallets, it could be any place where they feel comfortable. You need to keep an eye on that. That's why it's important to have open areas, accessible areas, and decrease the clutter as much as possible.
Okay. Do you eat compostable packaging materials?
Chew through packaging materials. They're active gnawers. So it depends on what's in that particular product, but we've seen them chew through a variety of things, even alcoholic beverage bottles, which I would think would be repellent. The material in them would be repellent, but just out of curiosity, if not attraction to that item, their sense of smell is very keen. So in active gnawers, they can actively gnaw through any of that type of packaging material.
Related questions here, John. One is, if you had an infestation, how do you know the main reproducer was killed? Or something similar here, if you see in a certain area of the building, does this always mean there are more where that one came from?
Certainly, it's an indication that we need to look farther and inspect collect farther to see if there are more. In terms of knowing if you've gotten the last one, typically the escalation process will require more frequent visits, sure that we're on it. So a number of maybe 2 or 3 visits where we no longer see evidence of activity within a facility, and that would include droppings or any more feeding activity, and certainly no more sightings of the rodents themselves, that we could consider that we've probably eliminated the population. But certainly we'll want to go back 2 times to verify that that's the case. So it's important to clean up those droppings, clean up the nesting, because those are good first signs that we still haven't eliminated the population.
Okay. What, should we incorporate locations in our environmental swabbing that target possible rodent activity in highway areas? And I think there was a follow-up question, such as near doorways and traps.
I guess I'd have to ask what you're swabbing for. My guess is that you may be doing some ATP tests where you're looking for soil. Certainly rodents are going to carry in soil and such, and from their urine and their bodily secretions, so that'll show up positive. If you're looking for particular organisms, it's very difficult to say. You know, they do breed and feed in unsanitary conditions, and there's a lot of different types of bacteria and fauna that we can find in those areas.
Specifically Salmonella and Listeria.
Yeah, and you know, in terms of them being able to actively transmit those, we've been able to do any direct linkage to these pests, but when you think about Listeria and such, these are very important organisms. We haven't any documented evidence of an outbreak being directly associated with rodents in any situation, but they have been shown to carry all these different types of pathogens. So the potential is always there for them to do it, but targeting the rodent areas themselves is something that we'd have to make attention to that based on what's going on within that particular facility and situation.
All right, we have a participant from Arizona that states that they have many citrus trees. Is it important to remove fruit?
Fruit is a particularly luscious material for roof rats, and yeah, they will be attracted to that. So, you know, when we talk about protein baits, it's funny. Roof rats really don't like peanut butter. It's not a national type attractant or bait anyway for a pest service provider to use, but oftentimes that's the go-to for the homeowners and such. Roofs don't like peanut butter, and they are very picky eaters, and rodents themselves tend to have feeding dialects. And what that means is, once they've established themselves on a certain food source, they tend to stick to that food source. So if you have roof rats or other rodents going after that fruit, that means that they've learned that that is what material that they prefer to find, and as best as possible to try and keep that cleaned up and removed from access.
John, could you begin some of the escalation procedures for rat infestations?
Yeah, typically what we'll do, and it depends on if it's Norway or roof rat, there's different scenarios that can be used. Again, these are wary animals of new objects, very neophobic. So what is typically done is traps are put out, and these are multiple traps, sometimes hundreds, and depending on the facility, maybe thousands. We've had situations where that's happened. And we pre-bait, oftentimes we'll pre-bait traps so that the rodents become comfortable with them, and they're associated with feeding on them. So traps are a very good way to remove rodents quickly and get them out of there. But with roof rats and Norway rats, pre-baiting of these traps is often necessary. And again, they need to keep this going for a number of days. So you've got a lot of density in terms of these traps you put out. Much of the video footage that we've taken of rats in these environments, and as mice as well, is they do a lot of jumping, they do a lot of moving around, and they're very good at avoiding new objects. If they happen to randomly jump into one of these traps, well, that's great, but we have to get them comfortable with the traps that are in there. So oftentimes it'll be very dense placements of these traps. For example, in a food retail, they'd be under the gondolas, hundreds and thousands in some cases. And then getting in there and paying attention to what's being caught and keeping up the process until the population's been eliminated. So there is a science behind it, and is also required.
Great. There's a few questions here, John, that we'll go through.
Okay.
And I actually was curious about, but another participant asked, would mice and rats live in the same space?
Not likely. Again, they're going to compete, and really, when we usually go out, we will see it's either or. So they tend to compete for space, so we don't see it all that often. It can happen, but usually one rodent species is dominating.
And another related question about behavior for mice and rats. Do they burrow in the ground in lawns or near cement foundations? And if so, do they go inside, or are they more likely to go inside for the winter?
That sounds like a couple different questions there. First of all, burrowing can occur outside the structure, of course. That's their natural nesting behavior, is to produce burrows, and obviously they're seeking shelter. Rats and mice especially, are very susceptible to a hypothermia, so they need to have a warm spot, and they need to be in close proximity to their nests. So burrowing outside, that's their natural happy habitat, if you will. But sometimes those burrows will go under facilities, and there may be an access point that they can get in through, like an expansion joint or such, into the area. So that's fairly typical of what we see. And we do look for the activity outside. We typically don't bait those themselves, because you don't want to have the bait open and possibly being translocated by the rodent. That's a hazard that we try to avoid. So it's very important to have those perimeter stations secured with the proper attractant in it, product, whether we're using trapping techniques or we're using toxic bait. They need to be put out to protect the facility, because ultimately we cannot keep rodents from burrowing around the property very well.
I think one final question here for right now. Do these practices about exclusion apply to other pest programs or other pests of concern?
That's a great question. This obviously is going to be a key area where we want to focus our exclusion, and about those larger openings. It is very difficult to keep out other pests such as insects, large species of cockroaches in the southern tier of the United States or the southern smile. We might have some success at that, but keeping crawling insects such as ants out would be very difficult from an exclusion standpoint. However, flying insects, that's another story, because we can see where they're getting in terms of you have the correct window screening and mesh size. There's other things that we can do for flying insects, but large exclusion principles apply mostly to rodents.
And one last question. What are your thoughts on the use of glue boards?
A mixed bag with glue boards. Glue boards will catch, again, these are things that are generally easily avoided by rodents. Now, glue boards are not allowed in certain parts of the world because there's animal welfare laws that prevent them from being used. They're considered to be less humane than other trapping methods. So there's many different types of considerations here. They tend to catch, really, again, the very young and the dumb, the ones that just wander right into it. They're not very good at using in escalation procedures where there's many rodents that need to be removed. The snap traps tend to be more effective. The thing to worry about with the glue boards, especially if you're using them in food service facilities, in that public health departments may see insects such as cockroaches being kept on that and note it as something that you probably don't want to put a report. So there's a lot of considerations when it comes to glue boards, so I would consult with your pest management provider to be sure that that's the tool that should be used, or part of an arsenal that should be used.
All right. Questions that have come in right now, John, I really appreciate you answering these multiple questions. Any closing thoughts?
So, remember, this is time when we're getting to other pest seasons, so fly season is coming. So you're going to want to work with your pest management provider on that. There's a variety of technologies and tools that can protect your facility against flies. Ecolab has developed a variety of proprietary pieces of equipment and such that can really help reduce the flies getting into your facility. Also, as the floor temperatures start warming, you're going to start seeing some more small fly activity. So that's an area where, again, you're going to want to consult with your pest management provider, because they are breeding indoors and they are a sign of some sanitation issues somewhere. And the rodent populations, that's something that we keep an eye on all year, and particularly in the fall, when the fall comes up, is where the rodents will really be trying to get into your facility. So that's when the programs need to be stepped up. So my final thoughts, and I thank everybody. And no further questions.
We'll turn it back to Sammy.
Thank you, Stephen. Just a reminder that the recording of this presentation will be available Friday, April 24th at www.ecolab.com/media-center/presentations. Our Foods webinar is the third Tuesday of every month. Our next one is May 19th, 2015 at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Keeping in 2015, navigating food allergies. Is there anything I can serve? And it was presented by Nicole Delaney, Principal Chemical Engineer, Institutional Technical Account Specialist, Ecolab. And please answer the survey question that will follow today's presentation. This is where you can request continuing education certificates. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to speaking with you on May 19th.